Welcome back to the Placeholder Podcast, everybody. I'm Kaylee Fretz, coming to you from Paris and the Olympics, and with a special guest on the pod today. Welcome, friend of the pod, Zach Williams.
Hello, Kaylee. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here.
We also have on the line Kit Nicholson. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
And the dynamic duo, Johnny Long and Ian Triller from Norway.
Hello. It sounds like you're announcing like gymnasts at an Olympics. Ian and Johnny from Norway.
Why would we be gymnasts in this scenario?
We are in Norway.
This is going to be a slightly chaotic podcast because we're sitting in three different places. We only have one mic here between Zach and I. We're trying to zoom into this podcast chat with two different devices and 3 to 5 microphone or headphones. But let's get right into it. Kit, can you give me a rundown of what happened over the weekend? I can't imagine anybody out there didn't see this already, but who won Olympic road races?
First of all, they were both, the men's and the women's races on Saturday and Sunday were both fantastic. And it classics-esque. And that includes the interminable run-in for the men in particular, which lasted about 200 kilometres. Zach is nodding his head fiercely, having been sat on the back of a motorbike for that duration. But yeah, so...
we're going to ask him all about that.
So Belgium bossed it on Saturday with a lot of... Well, they were on the offensive from quite early on. And it was Remco Evenepoel who went solo on the brilliant local circuits in Paris, up the climb to the Sacré-Cœur, and he soloed to the finish. There was a hairy moment when he punctured 3.5 kilometers from the end, but he made it all the way. And yes, it was a picturesque finale, and he was
not quite picturesque enough, I think Zach would say. Yeah, and then fast forward to Sunday, and the women's race, which like the men's had some top favourites, but it was not a favourite who took the gold in the end, but it was probably at least the wiliest, the smartest race that probably won the day. Kristen Faulkner made the move of the day really, to split the bunch on the climb, and then there was an attack late with Marianne Vos and Blanca Vas, who attacked out of that group, and they almost made it to the finish before Faulkner again attacked and brought Lotte Kopecky, a major favourite, back to the front. But Faulkner then caught the favourites napping in that last 4 kilometres, attacked 3 kilometres to go, and she was gone. They let her go, looked around, goodbye, the gold medal was gone, and then the sprint for second was it's where you expected the gold to come, Vos versus Kopecky and Vas. A weekend of fantastic racing. Well, so part of the reason we have Zach here is because, Zach, you were on the back of a photo moto for the duration. And, well, I'd get your sense of what it was like. Tell me what it was like out on a moto in that chaos. And like probably one of the best attended bicycle races I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, it was by far and away the biggest crowds I've ever seen at any race that I've covered, including the Tour and any Grand Tour, any classics race. It was unbelievable. And especially like Kit said, that run-in that the men did for 200k of just nothing and pedaling around in a big group, it sort of lulled me into a false sense of boredom, I suppose, because then once we got into Montmartre and the city circuits, it was overwhelming, to be honest. And the wall of noise that hit us and the people and the sort of thickness of the crowds was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was nuts. Like I'm still sort of coming down from it now.
During the men's road race, I was at a team presentation at the Arctic Race of Norway, watching the riders, watching it on little phone screens up until the last possible second, and then pretending that they wanted to be up on the stage for the presentation. So they would just watch it, and then it'd be like, Team Cofidis. And then they got up on the stage for 30 seconds, answered questions, got off the stage, and then kept watching it on their phone screens. It was great.
That's fun.
How did all of the riders... I think we really want to focus on Norway. Like, let's talk about the biggest story of the weekend. So how did the riders in Norway feel about not being at the Olympics?
I'm sure some of them probably had a moment of disappointment that they weren't there. But in Paris, it's not sunny in the middle of the night. So there's that.
Did Chris Froome at least sort of lift the mood by handing out free quad locks to everyone that was there, just for a bit of morale, or did that not really?
Well, Chris
happen?
Froome has an enormous satchel of treasures that he carries around with him, which I was shocked to see. Someone came up to him for an autograph, and he fished around in his little satchel for his own personal Sharpie that he signs people's shirts with, so that he doesn't get germs, which was great. So we went up to him yesterday.
He was
sitting outside a van next to a mountain.
Sitting on the wheel, like against the wheel arch.
Leaning against the wheel. And we went up to him and said, do you have a moment to talk to us? And he sort of looked up warily, probably asking if we were going to ask bad questions about retirement or why he's still doing this or anything like that, with respect to a legendary career from a very nice man. But we said, no, we just want to know what you carry around in your bag. And he lit up a little bit at that and told us that it's just a simple race bag that he carries around. And we said, is it team issue? And he said, no, the team issue one's from Israel Premier Tech.
You can't say that. That was said in confidence.
Okay.
He said they were great.
He said that the team issue bags from Israel Premier Tech are really good.
It was it's like, you know how people who are really into the gym have started using like workman's tool bags to carry around their stuff because it's the perfect compartments. That it's like his version of that. And he also said that on the transfers during races like these, where he likes driving 2 hours out and then 2 hours back, like what he does to entertain himself, and he just looked at us and sort of just went, emails. So even after all these Tour de France victories and everything else, there's just the same life, just a bit different in the middle.
I want to pull it back to Paris.
Yeah, we're done now.
We need to get into bus.
The Norway color.
We have to get the bus.
Oh, you guys need to go get a bus.
On Paris. Looks great out there. Hope you're having fun. The Olympics looks really good. And good racing. And I can't wait for the track this week.
Fantastic racing. Well, that's why we have Kit on. We're going to talk track a little bit. Let's dig into the road races a little bit more. I want to hear more about what Zach saw. But Johnny, Ian, if you guys are going to pop off and go do Norwegian
You have
things.
to listen to the podcast now to find out what was talked about.
Yeah.
How novel.
All of the...
Can you say goodbye in Norwegian, please, Ian?
How to bar.
Love you all. See ya.
Ta-ra.
All right, with those two goofballs gone, I think we can talk a little more bike racing. Let's just start. We'll go in chronological order here. Let's start with the men's race on Saturday, and let's talk specifically about Remco. I mean, it's a pretty incredible run this summer now. And Zach, would you have predicted this for him in Paris?
Well, I don't think I would have bet against him. That's probably the biggest thing. After his tour performance and everything he tied together there, and finally getting 3 consistent weeks under his belt at a Grand Tour, resulting in a bloody podium behind the 2 best Grand Tour riders of multiple generations, really, you could argue. I mean, as you've seen before with Wigo winning in London and everything, legs after the Tour, they're either the best you've ever had or they're the worst you've ever had, I suppose, from what I've heard from riders and I guess what you've seen with performances. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a surprise, particularly the time trial. But the way he rode the road race, I mean, it's like he said in stage 9, he had the balls and, yeah, he got it done.
I was reading L'Equipe ahead of the race, and L'Equipe was saying that it wasn't hard enough. They were saying that the climb wasn't hard enough, that it wasn't nasty enough, that it was going to end up being a larger bunch sprint. This is what the opinion of one of the L'Equipe riders anyway. They wrote about 1 million stories ahead of the race. Clearly that was wrong. Clearly it was hard enough, and particularly the men's race, given the length, it had sort of Milan San Remo vibes.
One of the really interesting things about the Olympic road race is that there are 4 riders, well, maximum 4 riders per team, and that's only only half a dozen teams had 4 riders anyway, and you've got 270 kilometers to deal with. So there's there were plenty of lulls where they were almost having to put their feet down. It was so slow. Then there were instances like, I think it was about 90 kilometers from the finish, if not more than that, when Tiesj Benoot lifted the pace and they just started to punish the peloton. And of course, if Belgium had 4 riders, the Netherlands only had 3. Van der Poel only had 2 teammates, and one of them was Dylan van Baarle, who was a fantastic rider but was coming back from injury, and the other had been swapping off on the front with Tiesj Benoot all day. So it was a case of Belgium had to use the cards that they had, and they were a team of essentially 4 leaders, so they could just smash everybody else. And so they basically, they chilled for almost 200 kilometers, and then for the remaining 100, they just tried to make everyone else hurt, and they managed that with repeated accelerations. And, the attacking that was relentless for, 20, 30, 40 kilometers before the circuits had even arrived. That's what made the difference when it came to that not very steep climb to of Montmartre. It was also quite narrow and windy, so it was difficult to move up if you were dropped, if you were far back in the group.
Zach, sort of describe what you experienced as you came into those circuits, because I think that, like, on paper, it didn't look that hard, right? Like, that's why L'Équipe was saying, we could see like a sort of medium-sized bunch sprint almost here, and it did not end up being like that, right? So what was it about the actual entrances? Was it corners that people weren't paying attention to? What was it that made it difficult?
I think it reminded me a lot of Glasgow last year. It wasn't as crazy as that was. I mean, it wasn't as technical or as intense, but it still was a proper city circuit. And I think, like Kit just sort of touched on, they really started to ramp it up 80, 90, 100 Ks out. And by that point already, there'd been, a lot of sort of relaxing. And I think everyone was still quite fresh, even though they'd done 150 Ks already, which is quite absurd to think. But the reality was, I think once the action kicked off, there was so many guys who were ready to just rip it that it just blew up anyway by virtue of the reality of the circuit and positioning and everything. And I mean, even on that first lap, the most interesting part I thought was I was up at Sacré-Cœur shooting as they came past, and Remco was 20, 30 dudes back. Van der Poel and Wout went through, and Healy was off the front, but Remco didn't follow those attacks. He backed himself to know that he can't follow those, quote unquote thermonuclear attacks that the other two launch, and came back and rode the race he knew he needed to ride to win.
In addition to that, the comment on it being, narrow and a little bit, I mean, it wasn't, if you look at some of the roads that they were on, and probably most of the roads they were on, even on the Paris circuit, they were quite wide Parisian boulevards that we see at the end of the Tour de France. But unfortunately, and, this is there was a lot of talk over the weekend as to whether this could be used in future Tours de France. It's not likely, because yes,
I think
but
that'd be great.
One of the reasons that it's very unlikely, apparently, to be used at least in that last weekend is that you saw, if you think about on Sunday where Chloe Dygert crashed, it was really, really narrow, and Thierry Gouvenou had said that it was barely wide enough in places to open the car door to provide support. So for the Tour de France peloton, which is twice the size of the men's Olympic road race peloton, it would be impractical to have it on stage 20 or 21.
Look, it's definitely a challenging circuit, and it's definitely technical, and it's not as easy as the classic sort of Champs-Élysées finish. But to be totally honest, a third of that circuit is technical, a third of that circuit's narrow. These guys do, and these girls do races like this week in, week out, where they understand the importance of positioning, they understand how they got to ride and when they got to be in place. I mean, if you had that on stage 21 and just said, look, GC can't change, but have a proper race like they do for the sprint, but it's just Van der Poel, Van Aert, classics guys going for the win, I think that'd be epic. And I don't know, after we went to Nice this year and had a different finish, why not do it again differently, just in Paris? Where
and clearly
I think
you can still have 100 plus kilometers of procession.
Yeah. Or do 2 days in Paris, right? Make this stage 20 and then do the stage 21 Champs sprint finish.
Can you imagine what Jonas Vingegaard would say?
He'd
be like,
cool.
no, that's not fair. It's going to rain and I'm going to puncture and then I'm going to lose the Tour de France.
There's been a lot of punctures, like high profile punctures this Olympics, speaking of.
Yeah, but I think also we're probably more cognizant to the punctures because there's no radios and, there's only 2 or 3 riders in cars and it's just chaos. I think the whole radio debate, I don't feel that it adds anything to the racing. I think it makes sort of run-of-the-mill normal punctures way more stressful than they need to be. It takes riders out of contention that otherwise would still be able to challenge. And I think it also can lead to more dangerous racing purely from a basis of warning the riders of dangers coming up on the course and things like that. So the small teams, that's wicked. I love that sort of dynamic, but I think taking the radios away just adds another barrier to having the biggest riders or the strongest riders on the day contesting for the win.
Did you see what happened to Søren Werenskjold? So he...
Yeah, I went round the corner.
Well, and then he was just left.
saw him with
he
his
was
bike
left on the side of the road because his team car just didn't see him. And so he was walking to the finish.
He finished on a Shimano neutral service bike, which is quite funny because he's 6'6" and he was on a sort of 56 centimeter bike with the dropper post all the way up. But yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example, Kit. It's that someone who was doing a really great ride. If you had a radio, he would have been able to tell the car ahead of time. That section into that out of Montmartre, that super sharp, steep right-hand corner out of there was really technical and really sketchy. They were hitting it so fast. And, makes complete sense that the team car would have just missed him. But yeah, it's a perfect example of radios just not adding anything to the race.
I do think it's kind of fun when we know a lot more than the riders do. Like, that is genuinely kind of entertaining. It's when you can sort of you can watch them make errors in real time.
Yeah, and it prevents the sanitized racing that we've sort of seen before. But at the same time, I mean, everyone's banging on about how incredible cycling is at the moment, how amazing the racing's all being, all of the classics, all of the Grand Tours. They've still got radios, so I don't think that changes anything in terms of anyone being able to push more watts or sort of race hard or race in an exciting way. It won't stop Pogačar attacking with 80k to go or Van der Poel going like that as well. But it just means that maybe with 150k to go, someone's not going to get left behind or really, really sort of disadvantaged by a mechanical.
And maybe Kristen Faulkner would have known she was winning the bike race.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she was pretty sure, but also I've personally been in that experience where we're like, am I winning? Not the Olympics. For me, it was parking lot crit. But am I winning? Am I losing? This is my third.
Well, she saw it.
Which brings us to the women's race.
3 years ago. I mean, you don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, exactly. So let's kick over to the women's race. So, I mean, I would say that this was not just I would say, everyone would say, this was a much less expected winner. I mean, Kristen Faulkner was kind of not even on the team a month ago, right? She lost the time trial, right, to Taylor Knibb, the triathlete who ended up doing the time trial here at the games. They basically had to shuffle names around, and she was part of the pursuit team, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, she was almost not here, right? The rider who won the race was almost not here, which one, I think, says some maybe not great things about the way that the U.S. does Olympic selection and the way that we've always sort of been really heavily focused on the time trial, much to the detriment of any chance at the road race. We sort of assume that the road race is less controllable, and so therefore it's no point in trying to set up for a win. And then look what we do, right? We no gold in the time trial and gold in the road race.
It's sort of the equivalent of if the Netherlands picked their road race riders based on time trial performances. And yeah, Van der Poel's handy on a time trial bike, but yeah, he's not going to beat the specialists that the Netherlands have, like Van Baarle or anything. So imagine leaving Van der Poel home. And I understand, in the equivalent that Faulkner's not the same sort of superstar in the women's peloton as Van der Poel is in the men's, but basing a team selection purely on how many watts you can push while you look like a praying mantis it's just a bit absurd, especially in the modern day where these sort of courses are won by an all-round rider who maybe will be good at the time trial as well, but more often than not that's not their main focus. They're not riding that bike every week. So it's a bit of a weird way to do things, but I mean, America's probably going to say it's the best like most stuff. But
well, I mean, it's worked quite well, right? You got Kristen Armstrong all the way through. It's gotten a lot of medals for USA Cycling, and I understand that they feel like they can control it, and so that's why you put the investment into it, right? But it is the opposite of ciclismo. It is just this absolute, if we can't 100% control it, if we can't do the math, we're not going to even bother. And I think that that's a real shame. And I think that it's been a real shame for years, for many, many Olympic cycles now, that the decision makers at USAC have sort of made this call to only focus on the time trial. And I think this weekend proved that is not the way forward. It's certainly not, it's not the way to inspire the next generation of cycling. Are you inspired by time trialists, Zach?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say more than you and less than Ronan. I quite like TTs, but at the same time, I mean, it's not the same. It doesn't feel the same.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth pointing out, and I mentioned it in the summary, but just how, I mean, there was an incident at the foot of the climb when just before Faulkner attacked. But again, it brings radios into the conversation again. Chloe Dygert crashes about 20-30 riders down in a corner, which disrupted a lot of the race, including Lotte Kopecky and most of the Dutch team.
Real good teamwork there. Great teamwork.
And then at the same time, but Faulkner she might have heard, in fact, she probably wouldn't have done because of the crowds. She wouldn't have known that had happened and that her teammate was involved. She went on the attack, created a group of 11, which then became 12 because Lotte Kopecky is an absolute beast and she bridged up to the group. Vollering and Wiebes were sat behind, as in the group behind, and never got back. So, Faulkner and Dygert, I guess, in a way, they created the race. They made it happen. And then Faulkner was just, I wrote in the race report, it was almost like Kopecky and then Vas and Vos. Vos supposedly wasn't the team leader for Netherlands. They were there for Lorena Wiebes, who did have a decent race, but she was always on the back foot. She was on the offensive. The only problem was she was a minute behind the front of the race. So you've got Vas, Vos, it's difficult to say, it's not really, but it's weird to say, Vas, Vos and Kopecky, and then Faulkner in that group of 4, which lasted all of, 15 seconds. But those three bigger names, and yes, I'm including Vas in that because she's that kind of multi-hyphenate who knows how to win. Not that Faulkner doesn't, but you know what I mean. Those three were sort of racing on instinct, whereas Faulkner clearly had a plan. When you look at how she was attacking on that last time up the climb with Kopecky on her wheel, you might easily think, no, she's racing for 4th now. She's going to drag Kopecky to the front and she's going to lose. But she did not. She knew what she was doing. She was racing for the win, and she knew, and she had that plan. She wasn't just waiting to see what everyone else was doing, and clearly the rest of them were. So it was a great race for the US.
Yeah, it was. And I think it was interesting because, so from my point of view, when that was all happening, when Dygert took everyone out and went down, I was at the top of the climb, or at least that's where I sort of saw the race unfolding the next point. And I was really confused as why Kopecky was out the back, why Vollering was out the back, and Wiebes, because I just thought, who's blown it up on the climb? Who's done what? And it's always that classic thing you get, even if you're on the motor or you're in the race, where you're trying to stitch things together. But I think the biggest reason Faulkner won was she had the guts. Like I was convinced that Vos and Vas, it's fun to say, were going to ride away with it because Group 2 syndrome. It's prolific in cycling nowadays, and this was an instance where a rider came from behind, and instead of the general sort of attitude riders seem to have, which is, if I can't win, I'm going to make sure you lose, she backed herself in to at least give it a crack, and she bloody won. It wasn't a case of, it would have been so easy for everyone to sort of hang shit on her afterwards if she towed Kopecky back and then Kopecky sprinted and won. But she had a crack, and full credit to her, because she was obviously on the ride of her life. But also, I think there's so many instances where so many riders are on similar days to that, and they revert back to that negative racing style of, there's 2 people in front up the road, I'm not going to chase if you're not going to chase, and they end up with nothing. So full credit.
Kind of like Wout and Van der Poel looking at each other all day. Well, Kristen Faulkner was not the only sort of outsider story of the day. Kit, there's something else going on a little bit behind, huh?
Yeah, so it's I would almost call it a classic Olympic story, and it's one of the things that you often pick up on from the Olympics, regardless of the sport. The breakaway, as is so often the case in women's racing, took a very long time to establish itself, if it establishes itself at all, but it did in this instance. And there were 2 riders in there who we haven't really seen much of, but they had been all over the front of the peloton from early on in the race, and that was Fariba and Yıldız Hashimi, sisters from Afghanistan. And what makes their story incredible is that, they fled from Afghanistan, I think 3 or 4 years ago. Again, it was 3 or 4 years after they had started cycling, which they'd done in Afghanistan in disguise, even from their families. So in 2021, when the Taliban retook control of the country and clamped down on women's rights, and part of that was women were not allowed to take part in sport, they were able, through reportedly contacts within cycling, to flee on an Italian evacuation flight. They now race for the World Cycling Centre Women's Continental Team, which is based in Switzerland. So, and they do a lot of training in Switzerland. I think they're based in Italy, so in the Alps somewhere. And it's just an incredible story of, indomitable will and spirit and passion for the sport. And their dream, and the reason that they wanted to leave Afghanistan is apparently because they were they got into cycling.
I think they shared a bike for a while in the racing, and they decided that their dream was to race in the Olympics, and they made it happen. And they made it happen while being a key part of much of the race.
I love these stories. I absolutely love these stories. Like I chatted with when I covered Rio, I chatted with this guy named Brian Babylonia, who had won basically kind of like the like he basically had won one race. He's Puerto Rico, and that gave him a ticket to the Olympics. Like that was all it took. He won one race, and he showed up about 2.5 hours before the race actually started. He's just like wandering around the start area, sort of looking around, just kind of wide-eyed, so excited. Most of the time, these riders, sort of the last sort of 20% or so of the field, they don't necessarily have a huge impact on the race itself. They're kind of just, cannon fodder, for lack of a better term, or want of a better term. But this time, yeah, they had a real impact, and it's just an incredible story.
And yeah, a real impact that may have an impact on their futures in the sport as well, because it's not like they went on the attack for 10 kilometers and then pinged out the back of the peloton. One of the Hashimi sisters led the race with Serac onto the finishing circuits, and they were both very, very, very good in the they were more than just cast aside by the racing peloton.
They weren't just rolling around, they were racing. And yeah, like you say, one of the sisters, I'm not sure which one, but she was right there into the start of the finale. And it's a life that nobody else in that peloton, really sparing one or two, could imagine. And yeah, the adversity that they've faced to this point, to then put in performances like that, surrounded by what I imagine would have been the most crazy feeling for them, is it's unreal, and it's such an incredible story.
That's what we love about the Olympics, right? It's the only place you get stuff like that. Let's head over to what's going on right now. Actually, we started yesterday as of recording. We got another track session this evening. Kit, what are the major storylines to keep an eye on at the track? What's been going on so far?
Well, I think the big story so far is that the track racing is going to be bloody fast, and that is that's not a big news story. But we started with the there were a bunch of qualifiers yesterday, but there was also the women's team sprint, which had the preliminaries, and then the first round, and then the finals, all in fairly quick succession. I think it was 2.5 hours of racing in total that they did, and so it's thick and fast. And it was particularly fast. The world record fell 5 times in one afternoon. And so first time was GB breaking it in the qualifiers. And then Germany, New Zealand, GB again. And then in the final, GB broke it for the third time that evening. Every time Team GB, they were relative underdogs. Germany was the big favourite coming into that race. So anyway, yeah, GB won in what seemed to be a kind of... So Emma Finucane, Sophie Capewell and Katie Marchant, whose 2-year-old son was in the audience. They are relative underdogs, who haven't really... the women's sprint side hasn't really been huge in the GB for maybe a decade or so. But there seems to be this kind of new generation. Emma Finucane is a reigning world champion, so it's been coming. Yeah, so that was a beautiful sort of, appetite wetter on the first night. And then we had the first round of the team pursuit qualifiers these were the men got the first chance to hit the boards, and it was as expected. The 4 big teams were Australia, GB, Denmark, and Italy in that order. Italy are the reigning Olympic champions, so they might be smarting a little bit coming forth, but it was the qualifying round, so it's not a big deal. And then, of course, the men's sprint teams had a chance at the qualifiers, and the Netherlands, as expected, with Harry Levriesen among their ranks, the fastest man in the world, arguably, on the bicycle anyway, smashed the Olympic record to qualify fastest by half a second, which is quite significant in a team sprint. GB were second there, and then Australia with Matt Richardson in third.
Mention of the GB team pursuit reminds me of the continuation of the terrible vibes at Ineos. We mentioned this previously. Like this isn't a new story because we've known that Dan Bigham was going to leave Ineos, and Dan Bigham, the sort of like I guess sort of performance director or optimization. I don't know exactly his title, but he was sort of in charge of making things faster. And he put on social media, I think it was last week, sort of confirmation that he was out the door, and also the reason why. And the reason why was particularly interesting to me, which was that he's basically saying Ineos doesn't care enough about performance, which is a wild thing for him to say, and kind of backs up all of the like weird stuff that we've just noticed from that team in the last 6 months or so. And what we were talking about all throughout the Tour de France is just sort of like something is off over there. And when you lose a guy like Dan Bigham, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's really curious. I actually spotted at the road race the bikes that the Ineos boys were riding, so like Pidcock and the rest of them. And on that sort of, because Bigham said in his tweet, I think it was, that they're not chasing the sort of edge that they used to, or they're leaving performance on the table. And sure enough, like the bikes were spec'd totally differently. I mean, the Pidcock's bike had Princeton Carbon Works wheels on instead of the normal Dura-Ace ones. It had an oversized pulley wheel. It had a different out front mount, like an aero optimized out front mount. All different stuff to what their sponsors provide, i.e. Shimano for the wheels and the rear derailleur. So maybe that sort of it shows a bit of an insight into, that could be some of the performance they're quote unquote leaving on the table if for a race where they're not governed by their sponsors in the same way they are in a World Tour race, they're choosing to ride really quite vastly different bikes to what they race in normal races.
Ronan, Zach's coming for you.
Intriguing when you've got, I mean, Josh Tarling has just signed for another 3 years, and you've got Filippo Ganna on that team, and those are two of the fastest men on the flat. In a time trial position, anyway. I don't know. It's just it seems like a team that's grasping at straws, and Bigham is not the only one on the way out. I mean, I think didn't he report? No, he might have hinted that Ethan Hayter was also grumpy, one of his teammates on the Team Pursuit team, and Tom Pidcock, new mountain bike world champion. He is the world champion. New mountain bike Olympic champion. He's both. He's just both. A mountain bike champion. But yeah, so he's apparently looking elsewhere, and I mean, even before Tarling re-signed, he was being courted by others, we're told. So it's and you've got the sort of the outgoing oldies who are sticking around for another couple of years, most of them, and then you've got the young guns who, I mean, there's an argument that Ineos Grenadiers are not really sure whether they want to have a development team or they want to just just get new young guns going in within the team, because they've got a really, really, really young cohort coming through who haven't really done very much yet.
It's just really interesting. I know this has been said already by others, but UAE and Visma just seem to be Sky now, as in Ineos at the peak of their powers. And I mean, back to tech, like what Bigham's talking about, I mean, UAE's bikes are totally, they've got the money, as Ineos do, which is why it doesn't make sense to me, but they've got the money to spec the bikes however they want, and they do so. And look at what Pogacar's done this year, look at what the rest of you at UAE have done this year, and Visma and both of them seem to be making the sort of scouting picks and transfers that Sky used to make. And it just seems like it's gone from this destination team that everybody aspired to be in, and Tarling talks about always wanting to be in. And he's re-signed, that's great, but it doesn't seem to have the same clout, I suppose, that it did used to have amongst the most talented riders in the sport.
Weird stuff, just weird stuff. We don't spend too much time on that. We'll go back to Olympics here. Kit,
I mean, there's a lot more track to come. I don't want to. I mean, I focus a lot on the first night. Obviously, by the time this goes out, we'll already have had the men's team sprint. But you can look. It's pretty likely that the Netherlands. Australia's oh, really?
No, Australia will beat them.
Maybe.
Australia will beat them 100%. Like Glaetzer last night. Glaetzer last night was the slowest third man out of every single team, which was curious. But I don't know what happened there. I've got no insight whatsoever. But if he can pull a good ride out of the bag, it's going to have to. The final's going to have to be between Netherlands and Australia, and I say that with bias.
I would like to agree.
Yeah. I heard you hate Australia.
I would like to agree with that, partly because when Australia is the only team sprint team to have broken the Netherlands string since 2018, and they did it on this velodrome. So if they can work out what went wrong last night,
exactly.
Hope I would like. I mean, GB, whatever. They're great, and I love that rivalry between, you've got to have the underdog, and they're not even particularly underdogs, but you've got to have the dominant riders duped at some point.
And Harry Leveson is going to wrap up the individual sprint probably. So let's take Australia. I'll bang my I lived in Australia once drum and go for Australia as well.
It's cool. I think it's the first time that the team sprints are getting as competitive and as close as the team pursuits have been historically. I think, all three events now, men and women's, or four events rather, men and women's for both, are super close, and there are some sort of storylines that run deeper than just the four people against the clock for 4 minutes. So it's really interesting in track at the moment. It's great to watch.
And look out this weekend for some action from Lotte Kopecky and some big. I mean, she's the one name that pops into my head. There are a lot of other riders who are going to be going for gold, but Kopecky is one to watch in the women's race. Although there are a lot, if you look at the full field for both men's and women's endurance track, it's going to be a great Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Madison and Omnium. It's going to be a great weekend.
So much Olympics to talk about. So much Olympics. Kit, you're going to pop off here, and Zach and I, well, we're going to talk about photography. F-stops, shutter speeds, the rule of thirds, maybe? Yeah, if we're lucky. Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and when we're back, it's photography class with Zach Williams.
Cheerio. Enjoy Paris.
All right, Zach. Let's talk photography here. So we just put a story up on the site. What day is it? Monday. We put it up on Monday about the sort of, I don't know, I think it was the iconic shot that came out of at least the men's race. It was the one that I saw shared more than any other, and it was sort of that you ended up framing the Eiffel Tower kind of off to the I think right side third. Remco Evenepoel standing. Holding his bike up in the air or right in front of him. Tell me how that shot came to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I sort of touched on in the piece I wrote, it came to be, I guess, because of some people that I probably don't see eye to eye with deciding that they wanted to put the finish line where they did. So the last few months I've been hearing about this finish line for the Olympic road race in front of the Eiffel Tower, and it was being touted as the image of the games, which, now I think is probably that surfer image that's been shared around a trillion times, which is phenomenal. But, I was picturing, then I heard rumors of this ramp that was going to put the riders up really big in frame. So you got the big rider in frame, huge Eiffel Tower in the background. It's going to be a once in a lifetime shot. And I turned up a day before the road race and I saw the finish line at the bottom of a 50-meter ditch at sort of the base of the end of the bridge, and then the photographer's position up the top of the ramp, shooting down onto the rider from the better part of 100 and something meters away, and then trying to frame a 300-meter structure in the background. And I honestly almost started crying. It was just so demoralizing after all of the promise and the sort of hype around it. So I really wasn't hyped at all to take the picture, to be honest. I wasn't looking forward to it. But yeah, I got there on the Saturday, and for whatever reason, this never happens at any other race, but obviously the Olympics have got to be special. So we weren't allowed to cross the finish line on the motorbike, even though there was a huge car park right next to the finish, not even across the line, just before it, that we could have put 3 motorbikes in, myself and my 2 colleagues on the bikes. So I had to race through the streets of Paris. I left Remco with 9K to go at the top of Montmartre. I had to race through the streets of Paris on the back of the bike to get to the finish, to give myself enough time to literally sprint across the bridge from the other end, from the Eiffel Tower end, and get through security and gates and stuff to then get to the photography position behind the line. And I'm not kidding. I literally made it with 20 seconds to go. He was riding across the bridge as I got there. And I just sort of thought, well, my colleague's going to be doing the long lens shot. I'll just make a go of it, and I'll just try and take the picture, or at least the version of the picture that was available to me. And I stood between 2 TV cameras. I had people grabbing my back and grabbing the straps of my my newswear, which I hold my lenses and stuff in around me, trying to pull me away from in between the cameras because they're fretting that I was going to, I don't know, stand in the middle of the broadcast because, I've never shot a bike race before and I'm just really keen to ruin everyone's day. But it was so late in the piece that they couldn't do anything about it. So I just stood my ground and started shooting. And yeah, he rolled to a stop and chucked his hands in the air. And I got the picture. But even in the moment, it was cool to appreciate what was happening. But it was more from the sporting point of view of, holy shit, what a ride and how incredible and what a summer this dude's having. Not from a point of view of, holy shit, what a picture.
It's such a shame. I mean, you could actually see from the broadcast as well. Like, so they started off with sort of this tight shot on Remco, right? And they're pulling out. And you can see that even the broadcast camera is probably 10 meters higher than he was standing. So the shot that started out was just Remco against Rode, which is just such a damn shame. And it makes me wonder, like, there must be somebody whose job it is to like look at finishes of stuff at the Olympics and get this right?
Well, yeah, it has to be. And I mean, it really just doesn't make sense, because you can achieve that shot of rider against road on any road in the world, but only one road in the world has the Eiffel Tower behind it, and you were on that road and you decided to do it that way. And honestly, it was like someone was taking the piss. It was like, seriously, I turned up and I was like, oh no, like someone's actually joking. Like there's going to be a whole bunch of cameras around, going to get my reaction, and it's all going to be a big funny joke, and we're going to finish at the top of the ramp. But
you're on a TV show.
Yeah, exactly. I've just been pranked. Like, it's like, it just didn't make any conceivable sense. And I'd love to meet, and I don't mean this in a sort of rude or disrespectful way, but I really would love to meet whoever decided on that and just try and understand, because like you say, it didn't work in the broadcast. It didn't work for the vast majority of us photographers, and everybody on socials that I saw was saying, oh my God, I've been waiting for this picture, or I've been waiting for this angle. No one else got this angle. And it's like, yeah, because you really couldn't. And I was the only person that, because I turned up with 20 seconds to go, I had to sort of commit to something. Otherwise I was going to have nothing. So I thought, oh, like, screw it. I'm just going to shoot this. And it sort of turned out. But yeah, I mean, it's just annoying, because I just know it could have been so much better.
I think that's the hard part. Is like, yeah, you knew the potential was there, and yet it didn't really work. That said, it's still a great shot. Like, I think the reason why it works is the way you framed it kind of puts the balance in between Remco and the tower really, really well. Like, your eye kind of just sort of flows around it really nicely, and I think that's why it grabbed people, and that's why, that's why it got shared around a bajillion times, right? Let's talk about some of the other stuff you saw and did over the course of the day. So this is your first time on the back of a moto at the Olympics. You've been on the back of a moto quite a bit. You shot a whole bunch of the Tour on the back of a moto, right? Giro on the back of a moto. So not your first rodeo, but you said earlier that this was sort of like bigger than anything you'd experienced on the back of a moto before. Tell me about it. Like, what were you seeing? What was it like rolling up Montmartre, for example?
It's funny, like it felt like a normal day as soon as we got out of Paris, because it was, the route went from Paris out, did a big loop in the men's, a couple of loops, and came back, same as the women's. And then rolling out towards, the loops and stuff, it felt super normal. It felt like a normal classic. Like, I got a couple of pictures ruined by riders stopping in my frame for a nature break, which, it's the most demoralizing thing, because you frame up this really nice, super clean field shot just with sky, and the riders look really nice along the frame, and then before you know it, there's 3 or 4 of them rolling to a stop and doing their business, and your picture's ruined, and you just think, oh my God. So it felt like a normal day at work in that regard. But then, yeah, I mean, coming back into Paris, I knew it was going to be big, but I had no reference point. It's my first Olympics. It's my first sort of race of this scale, and oh man, I mean, just the wall of noise as I came into Montmartre near, say, Moulin Rouge, and then turned right onto that bottom climb and where the feed zone was. Random place to have a feed zone, as an aside. But anyway, at the bottom of like the deciding climb for the race, but whatever. And then just seeing not a single inch of space on any of the footpaths or the sort of side of the roads or anything, and people draped over barriers, and we were almost hitting spectators over barriers as we were taking corners and stuff. And it was the most visceral experience I've had at work so far. And just especially the biggest moment was coming around the corner to Sacré-Cœur, and it was like the Mer van Geraardsbergen on steroids. Like, it was so overwhelming. And it's funny, I reconned the Sacré-Cœur shot 2 days before on the training, and I had an absolute nightmare. Like, I walked up the Montmartre climb, I was waiting for all the riders to come through. It was a 2-hour time period allotted to training. And normally when that happens at like Worlds, for example, like in Glasgow last year, they do a whole bunch of laps of the circuit. So I was thinking, cool, I'm going to get heaps of chances to get shots. It's going to be sick. I'm going to frame up my images and work it out. And I got stopped by gendarmes, which is a sort of common theme of this job. And I had to stop and sit down in the little Montmartre, the narrow road section. And then every single rider from the men and women's peloton came through one big group and rolled past at like 5k an hour. And there was no picture. And I was like, all right, it's fine. The next lap through, they'll come past. I'll do Sacré-Cœur. It'll look great. Then I wandered over to Sacré-Cœur, framed up that shot, Belgium came through, and like the Belgium team, but all the cops had left, so they were just riding through members of the public, like at like 40k an hour. Remco was hooking through. I didn't even see them coming, so I missed that shot. And I'm like, it's all right, like they're going to come past again. And they never came past again. So I start walking back down to the bottom of the steps of the Sacré-Cœur, and I'm thinking, oh, what a shit day, like what a waste of time. And I see all the riders pass by again at the bottom of Montmartre, and I'm like, oh no, they're going to ride past again, and I'm going to miss them. So I have my camera bag on. I literally sprint from the bottom of the Sacré-Cœur steps to the top to get back to the top to shoot them. And these cops, when I got there, like red-faced and like huffing and puffing, they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, the riders are coming through again? They're like, no, they only do it once. So it sort of felt even sweeter when I got the Sacré-Cœur shot on the weekend, because I'd worked for it the days before.
Do you get off the moto for those? So you pick a spot and you chat with your driver, who... Have you worked with the driver before? Is you like the same guy every time? So first time with the driver, but you're like, all right, this is the spot. You get off, you take the photo, you jump back on. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's how I like to do it. I mean, there's certain situations in the race where you just can't do that. You have to shoot off the front, but I much prefer almost 99 times out of 100 boots on the ground pictures, because I just think it adds more context and more depth to the image, and you can be more considered about it and control everything a bit more. So yeah, I knew I wanted that Sacré-Cœur shot, and there was a little sort of bay we could pull off into at the top of the climb there, and we sort of got there, and you have literally 20 seconds to just sit down in the gutter and frame your shot up. And yeah, and then we jumped back on, and that circuit was insane. Like Florian, the guy I worked with, he was a fantastic moto pilot. I met him for the first time on Saturday morning, and he was ace. Like, he just got us everywhere we needed to be, and I was holding on for dear life in the best way possible, because it was just so intense. And yeah, once we were sort of on the way to the finish to beat Remco there, we were sitting 150k an hour through the streets of Paris. And I beat him by 2.5 kilometers. Like, you just had to go full gas, because it was so technical, and they go through there so much quicker than you can, even on a moto. It was nuts. Like, it was the most adrenaline I've had, I think, doing that, and for so many reasons. But yeah, the crowd, again, I just come back to it. It was so special, and I just felt so privileged to be there and to be able to capture it. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely 2 days I'll never forget.
We're going to cut the free version of the show off here, and we're going to head into After Dark. It's going to be a little bit different After Dark this week. After Dark this week is going to be, I'm going to ask you, Zach, how you got here. Because I think there's a lot of photographers out there who would love to do what you did over the weekend. And, you know, I've known you for a couple of years now. I've watched you work your way up, like, through the sort of like tiers of cycling photography, right? And I would say that this weekend, at least from my perspective, you reached the pinnacle, right? To be on a moto at the Olympics is super rad. So we're going to talk about that, but you got to be a member. So head to escapecollective.com/join, or just go to the website, sign up. You can hear how Zach got here.
Great website. Sign up.